The helicopter crash on the roof of a building in Manhattan. What we now know, at least one person, the pilot, has been killed. They don't know of any other injuries or fatalities. That is presumed to be the pilot. Hundreds of New Yorkers were evacuated from the building. It's a 51-story building in Manhattan, just a few blocks from Times Square. New York City Mayor de Blasio said moments ago that the cause of the crash is still not known. It is being investigated. More than 100 fire and emergency units have responded to the scene. We're told that the helicopter took off shortly after 1:30, around 1:32 this afternoon, East Coast time, from a heliport in 34th Street. Let's go now to CNN anchor Anderson Cooper, who's on the scene. Anderson.
Jake, thanks very much. We're here actually with Mayor de Blasio right in front of the building. Can you just explain what at this time you know happened?
Anderson, what we know is preliminary, but this much we know. This helicopter took off from the 34th Street heliport, ended up here, which is a very unusual situation. And obviously, that leads to questions that we have to answer.
Is this a usual flight path for?
No, this is an unusual situation for sure. Now, what we feel strongly is there's no nexus to terror here. There's no evidence of any act of terror or motivation. This is a commercial pilot. This is someone who's been doing this work for a while. Apparently was an executive helicopter used to ferry around executives. So
it's a one-pilot helicopter, as far as I understand.
That's what we understand. And the only fatality that we know of at this point appears to be the pilot. Does not appear there was any customer, any passenger.
Is there a landing pad on this?
No, there absolutely is not. Helicopters have not been landing on buildings in Manhattan for decades. There was a horrible crash in what was the Pan Am building some years ago, and it was banned after that. And in fact, a helicopter should not be in this area of Manhattan without the approval of the LaGuardia Airport Tower.
Is that because of Trump Tower or the Times Square? Or?
Certainly because of Trump Tower in particular. But it just something like this should have been authorized. We don't have any indication it was, but we're still investigating to confirm that.
Obviously, the conditions, there's a lot of fog up there. It's tough, low visibility. Could that have played a role?
It could have. I have to tell you, our fire department had to get up there over 50 stories, put out a fire on top of that building before any harm was caused to other people. Thank God they did an extraordinary job. New York City Fire Department got up there, put the fire out. There were no other injuries to anybody, either in the building or on the ground.
It's also extraordinary that there's not, the worst case, it could have been debris flown around. There's not.
And
no sign of that.
This could have been a horrible incident. This helicopter could have come down the street. There could have been a huge amount of debris. The only debris we heard of actually landed in one of the setbacks of the building, never made it down to the street. So this could have been a bigger tragedy.
Is the helicopter itself intact, largely?
The helicopter is pretty obliterated at this point. It was obviously a very hard hit. There was a fire on top of that. There's not much left of that helicopter. But, look, we don't know what happened and why it happened. This is very unusual. The FAA and the National Transportation Safety Board are going to look at this. It certainly begs the question of whether we need tighter regulations of the use of helicopters in densely populated areas. But we don't know what was going on with this individual. We see nothing criminal, thank God, but we don't know what was going on with him.
Obviously, just finally, anything involving a building and an aircraft in New York City, it brings back memories, it brings back concerns. What's your message to New Yorkers?
My message to New Yorkers is to be very clear. There was no act of terror here. There is no indication of any ongoing threat. This appears to be a very individual incident. We don't know if it was malfunction. We don't know if there's something wrong with the pilot. But thank God no one else was injured. When I first heard it, like you, because you're a New Yorker too, we immediately thought, was this an act of terror? Was this purposeful? It does not appear to be not only an act of terror, we're not even sure it was purposeful as much as an emergency landing or some other kind of instant problem that came up. But we're going to have a full investigation to find out what happened here.
Mayor de Blasio, thank you very much. Appreciate it. Thanks very much. So that's it, Jake. No act of terror that they're saying, no sign of that whatsoever. Possibly just a hard landing, a crash landing on a building, although it is interesting what the mayor said, Jake, about this not being a usual flight path. For those who aren't from the island of Manhattan, the takeoff point is on the Hudson River, which is in that direction, just 4 or 5 blocks, actually very near our new office is. And then that's basically crossing across the island of Manhattan. We're on 51st Street, around 7th Avenue. So it's not clear why the pilot was heading in that direction. But again, as you can see, if you just pan up right now, this building is in the clouds. And so obviously visibility up there is very, very low. Obviously, some helicopters are special equipment for low visibility. But a lot more to be learned, Jake, clearly about exactly why the pilot felt the need to land on this building, and whatever distress was in the chopper that made them crash here in the first place. Jake?
Yeah, and Anderson, as Miles O'Brien was saying earlier in the show, Manhattan is not an island that has a lot of helicopters buzzing around. I think there are only, at least according to Miles O'Brien, not including hospitals that obviously have helipads for emergency situations, I think there are only 3 helipads on the island of Manhattan. And so the idea that somebody would be taking off from the western part of Manhattan Island and then just buzzing over Midtown is certainly unusual.
Yeah, I mean, I've lived in New York all my life. Anytime you hear a helicopter, we used to be up by Columbus Circle. Anytime you heard a helicopter nearby, it was a police helicopter involved in something or called in to look for something. It is very rare that you see helicopters flying over. You know, they usually go over the water, and that's where the helipads are. They're on the east, they're on the west side of the Hudson River, on the east side, obvious for reasons. And that's why occasionally when you hear about a helicopter crash, it's in New York, it's usually into water because it's it's right after taking off or right before landing.
And this story, as a New Yorker, your response when you first heard about the story, was it the same that Mayor de Blasio was talking about, the punch in the gut? Oh no, maybe this again is what we experienced on 9/11.
Yeah, I mean, you know, any of us who are here, obviously that is a first thought. I was actually in a taxi or in an Uber crossing town to get to the office, and they were blocking off traffic, and it was clear something was going on. I immediately called into the office, and they said, you know, a helicopter crashed on top of a building. That's all we know, and obviously it raises immediate concerns. But again, it's a relatively small helicopter. As far as we know, there was just the one person on board, and the visibility is really bad today. I mean, not only is it raining, it's kind of miserable here on the street. When you go up high, if you're in the top floor of that office building, you know, you can't see out because there's clouds all around. So any pilot who, for whatever reason, is flying here, and again, we don't know why they would be doing that. This would be a very difficult area to fly in right now.
That's right, and you're at the intersection of 51st Street and 7th Avenue, just a few blocks from Times Square and Central Park. It's a 51-story building. Anderson Cooper, we'll come back to you. Thank you so much for that. I want to bring in CNN's Bryn Gingras. She's in New York. And Bryn, you heard Mayor de Blasio and the police commissioner and the fire commissioner all talking about the investigation that's going to happen right now, or that's actually already in the middle of happening. Big mystery as to how this individual, why this individual who was piloting that aircraft took off, and only 9 or 10 minutes later had obviously seemingly tried to touch down and land on top of a building.
Yeah, that's right, Jake. It's almost as if what officials didn't say is telling a lot, right? At this point, again, they reiterated it's preliminary in the investigation, but they didn't talk about the fact that there was, you know, the communication that was going on with LaGuardia. They didn't talk about where this helicopter was supposed to be going, its flight path, or, anything about the registration of the helicopter. Again, we don't know the pilot's name, who it belonged to. So there's still a lot of questions that are out there, which I know we keep raising, which is where, what was going on? Why was it in this particular area of Manhattan? Of course, it is a relief to hear that there was no terrorism threat, or there's no concern at this point for authorities in their minds. But why did it take off from that east side heliport, which is on the east side in the middle of Manhattan, and then end up just 11 minutes later on the top of this tallest building of that block? And again, a lot of question about, was there a Mayday call? Was there a sort of flight path this pilot was supposed to go on and then went a different path? Again, these are all major questions that investigators are looking into. And I know Anderson was talking about the visibility on the ground. It's difficult. Well, just let's keep in mind that New York City is full of cameras. Anytime an investigation gets started, authorities go directly to those cameras to answer some questions. And it is my belief, talking to many people, many sources, that it's difficult to have sight of this helicopter at times because of the visibility with the cameras. They're being blocked by the fog and because of this bad weather. So that's possible. It's causing some sort of hindrance in the investigation. And that's why we may not have some answers that authorities would hope to have had at this point. They also just might be sort of waiting until they have have some more confirmed information before releasing it. But some big questions here about, again, who is this pilot? What's the tail number of that aircraft? We know it's sort of an executive plane, or rather helicopter, that it took off. It didn't have anyone else on board. But again, that big question, what was it doing in the middle of Manhattan?
Bridget Gress, thank you so much. And I believe that the mayor had said, or maybe it was the fire commissioner or the police commissioner had said, that the individual's the helicopter was believed the home base for it would be in New Jersey, and they weren't sure exactly why exactly it ended up where it ended up. If you're just joining us, New York City Mayor Bill de Blasio, the fire commissioner and the police commissioner just gave a press conference in which they talked about this high-profile helicopter crash that happened earlier today, where a helicopter crash landed on the top of a building at 51st and 7th Avenue, just a few blocks from Times Square and Central Park. According to Mayor de Blasio, there is one fatality that they know of that is presumed to be the pilot. No other fatalities or injuries that are known of as of now. No reason for the crash, no motive for this being on purpose as of now. No nexus to terror is known as of now. A lot of mysteries ensuing right now as to how and why this happened.